shattered world of Verdor lay in ruins, its skies choked with smoke and its streets silent, save for the crackle of distant fires. Rhys Maddox, a battle-weary soldier, stumbles through the debris, the weight of his fallen comrades heavy on his shoulders. Alone with nothing but his empty rifle and the haunting memories of war, he's about to discover something that could change everything. Beneath the rubble, a small, trembling figure, an alien child, lies helpless, the same species he's been trained to destroy. But as he lifts the debris and looks into her wide, terrified silver eyes, Rhys realizes the truth is not what he's been told. In a world of lies, can one man and a frightened child stand against the forces that would silence them? The truth beneath the surface is more dangerous than war itself. What will Rhys choose? The fight for survival or the fight for peace? If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. The war had torn through the land like a storm, leaving nothing but ruins in its wake. Verdor, once a thriving planet filled with life and hope, now lay in silence, broken and burned. The sky was a dull gray, thick with smoke that drifted slowly, as if mourning the destruction below. The ground was littered with debris, twisted metal, broken machines, and the remnants of shattered buildings. Fires crackled in the distance, sending up small plumes of smoke that danced in the wind, but otherwise there was only the eerie stillness of death. Rhys Maddox moved carefully through the wreckage, his boots crunching over glass and twisted metal. His once pristine uniform was now torn and stained with blood, dust, and sweat. His rifle hung uselessly at his side, empty of ammunition. The battle had been brutal, and his unit had been wiped out in an ambush. One moment, they had been advancing through enemy territory, determined and focused. The next, explosions ripped through the ground, and the screams of his comrades filled the air. In a matter of seconds, everything had changed. Rhys was the last one left. He had no idea where he was, how far he was from friendly lines. All he knew was that he couldn't stay out in the open. The enemy still roamed the area, and every step he took brought him closer to danger. The air was thick with the stench of burning rubble and death. He had to keep moving. He passed what might have once been a school or a home. Now it was nothing but a collapsed, burnt-out shell of its former self. The roof had caved in, and the walls were charred black from the fires. Rhys stopped for a moment, leaning against the side of the building. He closed his eyes, taking in a deep breath. The air was thick and heavy, making it hard to breathe. His muscles ached from the long trek through the ruins, but there was no time to rest. Suddenly he heard it, a faint sound almost like a whisper coming from somewhere deep within the rubble. Rhys froze. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Another cry followed, a trembling, high-pitched sound. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Was he imagining it? No, it was real. Rhys crouched low and moved toward the sound, his eyes scanning the rubble carefully. The noise was coming from under a pile of broken stones and twisted metal. He pushed aside a heavy beam, the dust rising in a cloud around him, and dug his fingers into the debris. Something shifted beneath his hands, and he pulled harder, desperate to uncover what lay hidden. Finally, he saw it. A small, alien creature, curled up under the wreckage. Its skin was a pale blue, marked with faint glowing lines that pulsed softly. The creature's eyes were wide and silver, filled with fear and tears. It trembled, its thin arms wrapped around its tiny body, as if trying to protect itself from the chaos around it. Rhys blinked in disbelief. It was a Xian youngling. For years, humans and the Xians had been enemies. The Xians were the ones responsible for the destruction of human colonies, the ones who had waged war against them, killing countless soldiers and civilians alike. Rhys had fought against them, lost friends to their attacks. But now, here was one of them, an innocent child, trapped in the rubble of war. Rhys's heart pounded in his chest. He reached for his rifle instinctively, but the child didn't attack. It didn't even move. It simply looked at him with wide, terrified eyes. It was no soldier. It was just a child who had survived the same war that had destroyed Reese's life. Are you okay?" Reese whispered, his voice rough with exhaustion. The child whimpered, trying to speak, but its words were broken, soft, strange. It was hurt. One of its legs was trapped beneath a heavy beam, blood seeping from the wound. Reese could see the pain in its eyes, the helplessness. He stood there, frozen, torn. He had been trained to kill Zayans, to follow orders without question. But this was different. This was not a soldier. This was a child. A helpless creature caught in the same chaos and destruction that had consumed Reese's world. A wave of memory hit him, pulling him back to the day his own home was destroyed. The day he lost his little girl. The image of his daughter flashed before his eyes, her smiling face, her laugh ringing through their home. The thought of her voice calling out to him as the bombs fell made his chest tighten with grief. This child, this Zayan youngling, reminded him of her, of the innocence that had been stolen from him. Reese dropped his rifle. Without thinking, he knelt beside the child and gently lifted the beam off its leg. The youngling gasped in pain but didn't scream. It was too weak, too scared to make any noise. Reese carefully wrapped the child's leg in his jacket, trying to stop the bleeding. He knew he couldn't stay here, not for long. The enemy could be anywhere, but he couldn't leave the child. Not now. "Come on," he said softly, his voice steady. "We have to go." He scooped the youngling into his arms, careful not to hurt it further. Its small, cold body shivered in his grasp, but it didn't fight him. Its wide silver eyes stayed locked on him, filled with trust, with fear, with something else that Reese couldn't quite place. He didn't know why he was doing this, why he was protecting this alien child, but somehow he knew it was the right thing to do. Reese made his way through the ruins, his movements cautious and slow. He found shelter in a half-collapsed tunnel, hidden from the enemy's view. The tunnel was narrow and dark, but it would have to do. He laid the youngling on a blanket made from his torn cloak and gave it water from his canteen. It drank slowly, its hands shaking as it held the canteen. Reese sat back watching the entrance, his mind racing. What had he just done? What kind of soldier was he now? But as he looked at the child, the fear and uncertainty in her eyes, Reese knew one thing for certain. He couldn't just leave her. This child was more than a survivor. She was a reminder of everything he had lost. And maybe, just maybe, she was his chance to make things right. "What's your name?" Reese asked softly, unsure if the child would even understand. The youngling blinked, then touched her chest. "Lyra," she whispered in a voice so soft it was almost a breath. "Lyra." Reese nodded slowly. "Lyra," he repeated. He wasn't sure how long they would be safe here, but for now, he would protect her. He had no choice. Reese sat against the cold, rough wall of the narrow tunnel, listening to the silence around him. The world outside felt so far away now, buried beneath layers of rubble and war. Inside the dark tunnel there was only the soft sound of Lyra's breathing, shallow but steady. The young Zayan child lay on the blanket that Reese had made from his torn cloak. Her small form was wrapped in his jacket, but the chill in the air seemed to cling to her skin, as if the horrors of the battlefield still haunted her. Lyra's wide silver eyes fluttered open, and she looked at Reese with the same silent trust she had shown him since he had found her. Reese felt a strange warmth spread through him, a feeling that was so foreign after everything he had been through. This child, this alien, had shown him nothing but vulnerability and fear. But she had also shown him something else. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still a reason to fight. Still a reason to care. He wiped the sweat from his brow, his hand trembling slightly. The weight of his decisions was beginning to sink in. He had abandoned his mission, abandoned everything he had been taught to believe. In doing so, he had made an enemy of his own people. And for what? To protect this child? To protect an innocent being who had never fired a shot or killed anyone? Rhys didn't have the answers. All he knew was that he couldn't walk away now. Lyra stirred again, her small hands reaching out for the empty canteen. Rhys quickly offered it to her, watching as she drank slowly, her hands shaking. She was still weak, still recovering from the pain and fear of the past hours, but she was alive. She was breathing. And as long as she was, Rhys knew he couldn't give up on her. The minutes stretched on, heavy with the weight of uncertainty. Rhys couldn't help but think of his own daughter, Emma, the way her laughter used to fill their home, the way she would run to him with open arms when he came home from a mission. She was gone now, taken by the same war that had left him here, cradling a young Zean child. It was hard for Rhys to wrap his mind around the fact that this child, this enemy, was the same age as Emma had been when he last saw her. The thought of her tears, of her helplessness, made his chest tighten with grief. "Don't worry," Rhys whispered to Lyra, though he wasn't sure if she could understand him. "I'm not going to let them hurt you. I'll protect you." Lyra looked up at him, her silver eyes filled with something that Rhys couldn't quite place. Trust, perhaps, or a sense of hope that he hadn't seen in anyone for a long time. For the first time in what felt like forever, Rhys didn't feel alone. He was protecting someone. He had a purpose beyond survival. As the hours passed, Rhys tried to clear his mind, but it was difficult. The past few days had been a blur of explosions, gunfire, and the screams of his fallen comrades. But now, in the quiet of the tunnel, with only Lyra by his side, it was almost as if the world outside had stopped. It was just them, a soldier and a child bound together by an unlikely bond. Lyra's breathing slowed, and Rhys felt her body grow warmer, the chill slowly leaving her skin. She shifted in her sleep, curling closer to him, seeking comfort. Rhys glanced down at her, his heart heavy with emotions he didn't fully understand. It was strange to care for her, to feel the need to protect her. After all, she was from the same species that had killed so many of his friends, yet in that moment he couldn't see an enemy. He saw a child, just like his daughter, lost, scared, and alone. Rhys leaned back against the wall, his mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. He couldn't stay hidden forever. The enemy was still out there, and soon they would be looking for him. For Lyra. He could hear the distant hum of drones and the crunch of boots on the rubble, getting closer with each passing minute. They would find him. They would find them, but Rhys was determined. He wasn't going to let them take Lyra. Not without a fight. He had already lost too much. The thought of losing this child after everything he had done to protect her filled him with a rage that burned deep inside. He wasn't going to let her become another casualty of this senseless war. Lyra's soft whimper broke through his thoughts. Rhys quickly looked down at her, his heart skipping a beat. She had woken, her eyes wide with fear. The sounds of the enemy were growing louder. Rhys held his breath, listening closely. There were footsteps outside the tunnel now, heavy and deliberate. He could hear voices, but they were too distant to make out the words. Lyra reached out, her small hand touching Rhys's arm. She looked up at him with those silver eyes, her expression a mixture of confusion and fear. Rhys gently took her hand in his, offering her the reassurance he didn't feel himself. "We'll be okay," he whispered, though the doubt gnawed at him. "I won't let them hurt you." Lyra's grip tightened on his hand, and Rhys felt something shift within him, a resolve he hadn't known he had. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. This was about doing what was right. This was about protecting the innocent no matter their race or where they came from. For the first time since the war began, Rhys knew he had made the right choice. And footsteps outside grew closer, and Rhys knew it was time to move. He stood up, careful not to disturb Lyra, who was now clinging to his side. He grabbed his empty rifle, holding it tightly in his hand, ready to face whatever came next. "We have to go," Rhys whispered, his voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside him. Stay close and don't make a sound." With Lyra by his side, Rhys stepped into the dark tunnel, determined to protect her no matter what it took. They were no longer just hiding from the enemy. They were running toward something greater. A chance for peace. A chance to undo the damage that had been done. But that was a battle for another time. Right now, all that mattered was keeping Lyra safe. And Rhys would do whatever it took to make sure that happened. The unlikely bond between them had begun, and Rhys wasn't going to let anything break. Rhys and Lyra moved through the dark, narrow tunnel, the sound of their footsteps muted by the thick air around them. The faint light from their surroundings barely illuminated the jagged walls, and the deeper they went, the heavier the silence became. The distant sounds of the enemy patrols were still echoing above them, but in this underground refuge it was as if time had stopped. Lyra clung to Rhys's side, her small body trembling as she walked. Her silver eyes flickered nervously, but Rhys noticed a quiet strength in her that had begun to grow. She wasn't just a frightened child anymore. There was something deeper inside her, something he hadn't fully understood yet. But he could feel it, the same way he could feel the weight of the war pressing on his chest. Rhys knew they couldn't stay in the tunnel forever. The enemy would eventually search every inch of the city, and they wouldn't be able to hide forever. But he couldn't let them capture Lyra, not after everything they had been through. As he looked down at her, his thoughts began to race. This child, this Zayn youngling, wasn't just a symbol of the war. She was something more. She was proof that things weren't as simple as they seemed. The world Rhys had believed in, the world he had been taught to fight for, was starting to fall apart. As they moved deeper into the tunnel, Rhys noticed something strange. The walls around them were smooth, almost too perfect. They didn't look like the typical underground structures he had seen on other planets. There were no signs of damage, no signs of the destruction that had ravaged the surface. It was as if this place had been untouched for years, hidden from the horrors of war. He slowed his pace, instinctively aware that this place was different. "Where are we?" Rhys muttered to himself, his voice barely a whisper. He glanced down at Lyra, but she didn't seem afraid. In fact, she seemed strangely at peace. Her eyes, usually filled with fear, were now calm, almost as if she recognized something here. She reached out and touched the wall with her small hand, and Rhys froze. The moment her fingers made contact with the surface, something happened. The stone seemed to shimmer, faintly glowing beneath her touch. It wasn't a flash of light, more like the gentle pulse of energy. Rhys watched wide-eyed as the stone beneath Lyra's fingers rippled almost as if it was alive. "Lyra," Rhys whispered, his voice thick with curiosity and awe. "What is this place?" Lyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood there, for a moment, her fingers tracing the strange symbols carved into the stone. Rhys couldn't understand them, but he felt their significance. The air in the tunnel seemed to change, as if something ancient was waking up. And then, without warning, the walls of the tunnel began to glow brighter, casting shadows that danced along the floor. Rhys's heart raced. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew it wasn't good. The enemy would be able to find them if this place kept lighting up like a beacon. He quickly pulled Lyra away from the wall, but she didn't resist. She seemed almost drawn to it, as if it was calling to her. "Come on," Rhys said, his voice urgent. "We need to move." But Lyra looked up at him, her silver eyes filled with something he couldn't quite name. She didn't seem afraid, even though Rhys could hear the distant sounds of the enemy's footsteps drawing closer. Instead, she reached out, placing her hand on Rhys's chest, her touch warm against the cold fabric of his jacket. "Stay," she whispered softly, her voice so faint it barely reached his ears. Rhys looked at her, confused. "What do you mean, stay?" Lyra's eyes met his, and for the first time Rhys saw something in them. A depth, a quiet understanding. She wasn't just a child caught in the middle of a war. She was part of something bigger, something Rhys couldn't fully comprehend. She knew things that Rhys didn't. The ground beneath them shifted slightly, and Rhys could feel it, a deep rumble that seemed to come from the heart of the planet. The walls pulsed again, brighter this time, and suddenly a low hum filled the air, resonating deep within his chest. It wasn't a sound he had ever heard before, but it was soothing in a way. It was as if the very earth was alive, responding to something in Lyra. "Lyra, what is this?" Rhys asked again, but this time his voice was softer, almost in awe. He felt a strange connection to this place, to the energy flowing through the walls, through the ground. And somehow he knew Lyra held the key to it all. The hum grew louder, more intense, until the tunnel seemed to vibrate with energy. And then, without warning, an image appeared in front of them. It was as if the stone itself had turned into a living memory, projecting a scene from long ago. Rhys stared at the image, his eyes widening in disbelief. The scene was a gathering. Alien figures, all of them dressed in flowing robes, standing in a vast open space. At the center of the gathering was a woman, tall and regal, with soft eyes and a calm expression. She held a small child in her arms, a child who looked just like Lyra. The woman was speaking, but Rhys couldn't hear her words. The image flickered, and for a moment it felt like the air around them was alive with history. "Is that your mother?" Rhys asked softly, his voice barely above a whisper. He couldn't tear his eyes away from the image of the woman who looked so much like Lyra. Lyra nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving the image. "Yes," she said quietly, her voice filled with a sadness Rhys couldn't understand. She was a peace emissary. Rhys felt a sharp pang in his chest. The truth was beginning to unfold layer by layer, revealing a story that had been hidden from him for so long. The war, the battles, the enemy, everything he had been taught to believe, was all a lie. The Vaxari, the Zeons, had never wanted war. They had tried to stop it. And Rhys had been a part of the lie that had led to all this destruction. He stepped forward, his mind racing as he processed the weight of what was unfolding. "You're telling me your people never started the war?" Lyra nodded, her silver eyes filled with something deep and ancient. "No," she whispered. "The war was a lie. It was never supposed to happen." The hum of the walls grew louder and the image began to shift again. This time it showed a scene of devastation. Cities burning, families fleeing in fear. Rhys's heart sank as he realized what he was seeing. The war had started because of a betrayal he had been a part of. And now, the truth was out. The war was built on lies, and Rhys was no longer just a soldier. He was a part of something much bigger, something that could change everything. The air in the chamber grew thick with anticipation as Rhys and Lyra stood before the glowing walls. Rhys's heart pounded in his chest as he processed what was happening. The truth, the real truth about the war, was finally coming to light. Everything he had been taught to believe, everything he had fought for, was a lie. The image of Lyra's mother, the peaceful emissary, still lingered in his mind. The realization that the Vaxari, the aliens he had been fighting for so long, had never started the war left him reeling. "Why didn't they tell us?" Rhys whispered, his voice low and filled with disbelief. "Why did we have to fight you? Why did we have to destroy your people?" Lyra, still standing at his side, looked up at him. Her silver eyes were filled with sadness, but there was no anger, no hatred, just the quiet acceptance of someone who had lived through far too much loss. She didn't answer right away, but Rhys didn't need her to. The answer was already becoming clear in his mind. As the image of the Vaxari gathering began to fade, a new one appeared. This time, it wasn't a peaceful scene. The air shifted, and the chamber seemed to grow darker, as though reflecting the darkness of the truth about to be revealed. Rhys watched in silence as the image unfolded before him, his breath catching in his throat. He saw a room, a council meeting of human leaders, huddled around a table. Their faces were tense, their voices low but filled with urgency. They spoke of resources, of land, and of control. The words were familiar, ones Rhys had heard before. But now, they had a different meaning. He watched as the human leaders discussed the Vaxari, their supposed aggression, their supposed threat. But it wasn't aggression they were afraid of. It was power. Power that they didn't want to share. Power that they had decided to take by force. Rhys's stomach twisted as he watched the scene unfold. The human leaders had known the truth. They had known that the Vaxari didn't want war, but they had decided to create it anyway. They had labeled the Vaxari as enemies, as invaders, and they had set the wheels of war in motion. Rhys's hands clenched into fists as he realized the depths of the betrayal. How could they do this? Rhys muttered, his voice barely audible as the truth sank in. How could they lie to us? The chamber seemed to hum with energy, as if the very walls were reacting to Rhys's shock and disbelief. The images shifted again, and this time, it wasn't the human leaders that Rhys saw. It was the destruction, the war that had followed. The burning cities, the shattered lives, families torn apart. He saw images of children running through the streets, their eyes wide with fear. He saw the same destruction that had once been inflicted on his own people, now turned against the Vaxari. It was a war built on lies, a war that had destroyed so much. Rhys, Lyra's soft voice interrupted his thoughts. It was never meant to be this way. My mother, she tried to stop it. She tried to make them listen. Rhys turned to look at her, his heart aching for the child standing before him. Lyra's eyes were filled with something more than sadness now. There was a quiet strength in her gaze, a determination that Rhys hadn't noticed before. She had lost so much, but she wasn't broken. Your mother, Rhys whispered. She was a peacekeeper. She tried to stop the war. Lyra nodded slowly, her small hand reaching out to touch the walls of the chamber. The image of her mother appeared again, this time in a different light. She was standing on a platform, a symbol of hope in the middle of a gathering of Vaxari. Her face was calm, her eyes filled with the same peace that Rhys had seen in Lyra. She wasn't just trying to stop a war, she was trying to build something better, something that transcended the conflict between their species. Rhys felt a deep pang of guilt. He had fought against the Vaxari for years. He had followed orders, believed in the cause, and had seen too many of his comrades die for it. But now, standing in this ancient chamber, with the truth unfolding before him, Rhys realized the war had never been what he thought it was. The true enemy wasn't the Vaxari. It was the lies that had been spread to justify the destruction. The lies that had turned a peaceful people into enemies in the eyes of the galaxy. As the chamber hummed with the energy of the truth, the final image appeared. It was of a transmission, a message from Lyra's mother. Rhys watched as the recording played out, her voice filled with both sadness and resolve. We offered peace, she said, her voice steady despite the weight of her words. We offered understanding. We reached out with open hands, but we were met with fear. Fear destroys everything. Fear is the true enemy. Rhys stared at the image, his mind reeling. The message was clear. Peace had been within reach, but fear had torn it all apart. The war that had cost so many lives had been built on fear, on the fear of the unknown, of losing control. The truth had been buried beneath the lies, and now it was too late to undo the damage. Lyra's voice broke through Rhys's thoughts. We didn't start the war, she said softly, her eyes filled with understanding. We never wanted it, but we can stop it. Together. Rhys looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. For the first time in a long time, Rhys felt a flicker of hope. Maybe it wasn't too late. Maybe, just maybe, they could change things. They could fight for the truth, for the peace that had been lost. They could show the galaxy what had really happened, expose the lies that had fueled the war, and they could do it together. We will, Rhys said, his voice steady and filled with resolve. We will stop it. We will show them the truth. As the message faded and the chamber fell silent, Rhys and Lyra stood together, their bond stronger than ever. They weren't just survivors anymore. They were the bearers of the truth, the ones who would fight for peace no matter the cost. And as they prepared to leave the sanctuary, Reese knew that the path ahead wouldn't be easy. But it was a path they would walk together side by side, determined to make things right.